to the cloud. And I'm going to give you host permissions, right? So I'm going to make you co-host. There you go. So you can share your screen. And that way it'll be captured and we're set. Right?
Amazing. So
I
when
love
you-
this technology.
If you go in, just so you know, in here and set up the Zoom meeting through
Uh-huh.
the course,
Yeah.
there's a little button here next to start video.
Yeah.
It's not here.
It connects you to this.
Yeah,
yeah.
it goes the Panto and then
Right.
it just goes right on there.
Right. I know. I think I've seen that before.
I had not, and it was new for me.
But it doesn't show up now because I'm not on the network. I think
Right.
you have to be on the network today.
Someone,
So,
yes.
all right, let me do the introductions, then you can get started. All right, guys, listen up. Hopefully you all enjoyed the 911 case. What did you think of that? Was that useful? At least you got a kind of a sensory feel for how negotiations work between, say, a project manager, a software manager, and a client. So hopefully you have a sense of what that triad is like and how they have different priorities. They're talking about the same thing, but from different perspectives. So it gives you that sense of how to negotiate. Today we have a guest speaker with us, Jessica Bollhoefer. She's a lecturer, I guess I should say adjunct lecturer over at the NPM program, which is the Master's in Project Management. And you can say, well, how does this course link to that? This course focuses on new product development. NPM focuses mostly on construction and on, I guess, the built environment, we should say, right? So anything that's a huge space for project managers. I've never worked in that space. I've always worked in new product development. So I think in many ways we kind of complement each other.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Jessica's also worked at JLL, Jones Lang and LaSalle. You were senior director there. You're a global sustainability lead currently at Google. And so she's also at NPM, so she kind of pulls double duty. I'm going to turn it over to you. I know what it was like to pull double duty. I was with Motorola for about 10 years and an adjunct. And eventually I just came here full time because it's too hard to charge.
So fun.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Right. Okay, I'll leave it.
Wonderful. Thank you all for having me today. It's so fun. And please ask me any questions. I have spoken for 3 hours this morning, so if my voice sounds a little bit funky, that's why, but don't worry, I let people ask me questions too. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit about me and then talk a little bit about, like, for a second, about the difference between project and program management, and then give you an example of some of the things I've done. I'll talk a little bit about the history of some of the work that I've done, and then I'll tell you a little bit what I do at Google. So please ask me questions along the way. I have never worked, I've actually worked in product for like a minute, but most of my background really has been in the intersection of sustainability and real estate. So better understanding essentially our built environment. And I like to say, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second, but like I've gone from sort of very, very, very project-based, sort of thinking of things on a very portfolio and programmatic lens. But it's really a pleasure to meet you all. My husband is actually also an adjunct professor in the Invention program. So we really love the Northwestern environment. Super fun. I also only teach one class a year. That's enough for me. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite things, but the balance is great. So my name is Jess, and I have spent about 20 years in that space of real estate and sustainability. I do spend a lot of time talking about my work in business because I think sustainability can't happen, can't make the business case for it. So I do that quite a bit. The class that I teach is on sustainability strategies and organizations. So I talk about like why sustainability is important to organizations. We talk a lot about risk, opportunity, and benefits. So I currently am at Bruce, which is real estate and workplace services at Google, and I lead both net zero 2030 strategy for real estate, food and transportation. And I also lead the teams that do circularity, biodiversity, and water management. I used to do all of our metrics and measuring GHG emissions. I have now a team, and I do more of the long strategy and then a couple of that team. I have an undergraduate in architecture from UPenn. I do not work in architecture and bailed from architecture immediately, but I use that skill set all the time. So high props, but also don't do it. I have a graduate degree in sustainability management from Columbia. And I also have some certificate stuff from Kellogg during the time I actually worked here at Northwestern. So my path. I actually just had a student 10 minutes ago ask me to have a little bit of time. And we talked a lot about what type of work the student is gonna graduate to do. And I actually saw Bill Clinton speak about 20 years ago, at the time that I also was trying to make a decision about what I was gonna do with my life. And he said, current generations or past generations work for one company. It's the idea that you come into the work and you work at one company, you work at them forever. He said, future generations will have 5 careers. And I actually have had a number of different careers. And so I was hoping to sort of just talk a little bit about a few different parts of my path and how they've sort of brought me to where I am now and incorporating the idea of sort of project and program management. So started in undergrad, I liked art, liked math, decided to be an architect. That was like the thing you did. Thought it was really fun, loved the work that we did, and then I graduated and I was doing bathroom finish plans, and I was like, wait a minute, this is not what we studied. I also realized that I really liked being in the world of construction, and so I started working for construction management. And so at the time, I'm gonna actually come back to this in a second. I did, it's a company called Pepper Construction, and I worked for them for about 6 years, 5 years here in Chicago. And I worked on some really, really amazing fun projects. 2 specifically. The first one is Palmer House Hilton. So this is actually a hotel in Chicago. This, funny enough, is the reason why I moved into sustainability. So I watched an incredible investor buy the property and do a lot of renovations, except they were spending all of their money on carpet and paint and duct taping the plumbing behind the walls. And the reason is because a whole period for real estate is only 10 years for a hotel. And so there was no investment and no motivation for any investor to actually spend money behind the walls. And that is actually what drove me to sustainability. And one, actually, this is inaccurate. I apologize. That is a project that I did at JLL, which I should have done.
You know, that's this Earth building in Schaumburg.
Yes,
That's sitting on the Motorola campus.
it is sitting on
You
the
had to
Motorola
build
campus.
those, some beautiful Motorola buildings to pick that up.
That's an embodied carbon problem. This is slightly inaccurate, but I will update. So this is one of the reasons why I moved into sustainability. And so let me then say, sort of back to this, and I'll come back to the other one. Really loved working in the construction space, spent 5 years, and I did some other work, and started getting really interested in LEED certifications, which were sort of all the rage in the sustainability space at the time. It was really about sort of how to look at energy and waste and sort of site planning all together. And that led me actually to get my master's degree at Columbia. And so I decided I was actually going to get an MBA. And instead of getting an MBA, I decided I really wanted, there was this new program that had literally, it was the first year it had even come out. It was 2011. And I said, you know what, instead of doing an MBA, I really want to learn. And the reason I wanted to do an MBA, by the way, was because I didn't know how to speak business. I was always in these meetings where everybody was talking about finance, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. And I didn't know what a hold period was. I didn't know how it was possible that an investor wasn't focusing on the infrastructure behind the walls. And so I started thinking about an MBA. Granted, a lot of my friends also, when I graduated from undergrad, were business majors, and they bought me all my margaritas. Also, I was like, maybe there's something to this. So that actually led me to my sustainability master's degree, and I then worked at JLL for 6 years. JLL, did someone here who used to work here?
JLL, I don't think she's here today. Jackie? Wasn't Jackie from JLL?
Maybe.
She's not here.
Has anybody heard of JLL? Jones Lang LaSalle. So has anybody heard of CDRE? No.
They don't get out much.
I see this. Okay, so you will see this logo now more. They're a gigantic real estate company that does project management, property management, almost every single thing in real estate. So almost every company that you could possibly think of works with either JLL or CBRE to do some sort of real estate transaction. There's brokers, so they help find space for people. Again, like facilities management. So like basically making sure that the building itself runs. And these were things that actually a lot of companies used to do themselves. And CBRE and JLL came in place to basically say, don't you pay for it, give off the risk, we'll do it for you, and became an outsourced model. So they're really enormous companies now. I probably could have a bunch of slides that talk through the size. But I went from more project management work to slightly broader work in the program side. So now I'm gonna go back to those sort of project and program.
This is all commercial real estate mostly, right?
100% commercial. I've never worked in the residential space.
Okay.
Which is funny because I feel like it should be better to be able to do renovations myself, but like I'm not good at, because the scale has been so different.
But the idea of going to somebody like JLL, and we're gonna be talking about outsourcing next week, so this is a good prelude, right?
Cool.
But outsourcing, really, why do you outsource to somebody like JLL or CBRE? It's because they have the expertise. They have a concentration of expertise that you may or may not need at any given time. But it's good to have it on the shelf, so that you, in essence, when you need it, it's there. So you're not paying for full-time permanent staff of your own when you may not need them 100%, right?
Exactly.
But you can outsource it to people who are experts at this, who've streamlined the process, they got the automation, they got the tools, they can do it at the lowest possible cost, probably lower than you can ever achieve on your own,
Yep.
absent 10 or 20 years of investment.
Absolutely. And it hits your balance sheets in different ways.
There you go.
So you don't have to you don't have to have employees.
Right,
It can be an expense. And so if you do decide to shrink or grow, there's much less of a risk on your side. So there's a real benefit to
like a severance risk.
like a
right.
severance risk, right? So huge opportunities. So I went to JLL and led so I started out just in Chicago and did some cool Chicago projects. And then ultimately led our national practice for sustainability. So I was only focused in sustainability. And so we did projects with, well, let me take a break and to do this for a second. So I've spent the majority of my career sort of in between this idea of like, where they go skills of sort of project management and then program management. And starting out much more on this project management side. And the way I sort of see this is actually almost exactly the same. It's just about the scale that you're working in. And so project management just usually means for me in my career that it's more finite, right? You start one thing, there is a timeline, you know the thing that you're trying to achieve at the end, and there's an end date. In program management, for me, has been more of sort of a longer term strategy. It means there's lots of smaller projects within it. And so later on in the presentation, I can share a little bit about sort of how I work between those two now, sort of constantly. But my background is fully in that sort of project management, program management space. So I could talk for a long time, but I won't on this Zurich project. This is one that I worked on. This is an example of a project that I worked on. There should be a JLL logo on top of this for a company called Zurich, where this is actually one of the largest LEED Platinum buildings in the United States. And it's actually here in Illinois on the Motorola campus. And we did just an incredible number of really innovative things about like water capture and area restoration, as well as on-site solar and a lot of sort of other real estate related sustainability attributes we could talk through. But also at JLL, I helped like Nike do another project to bring a building down to net zero, but also took a portfolio, which means like all of the buildings for Bank of America, and helped them figure out which ones they would do projects on. And so that is like an example of an ongoing energy management program that includes lots of energy projects. So again, my job was sort of in between that and sort of floating in between those two worlds.
And for Schaumburg, this building represented kind of a transformation of that part of the village in terms of a step in a different direction than what they had in the past.
Yeah.
So across the street from there is the Schaumburg Convention Center. And they were eventually going to have a transportation loop that linked this building with the convention center with Woodfield Mall.
Yep.
Right. And I don't know if they ever got past the trolley stage. I think they're still
working on it. So Schaumburg itself has a pretty incredible, like, long-term development plan.
This was a big part.
And this is a big part of it. And actually, that's how they sold Zurich on doing the construction project on that old Motorola campus.
And the rest of the campus is now Viridian, which is like townhomes and condominiums. And the Motorola presence there is shrinking to the size of a postage stamp. So there's literally 2 buildings left. One of which, by the way, has significant environmental issues.
Yes.
Right, which literally I guess they can't bulldoze it because it might
Contaminate the soil.
contaminate the soil, and at the same time they can't occupy it. So it's just like this museum of stupidity there, right? It was like, this is how not to build buildings, right? And then on the other side is the Motorola building that's still in active use. I mean, currently it's one of their headquarters for solutions.
Yes, it is, and well, it's interesting, so I actually, the class I just taught, we just spent a half an hour on something called adaptive reuse, which I have a couple of examples of projects in here, but essentially the idea from that perspective is, do you talk about carbon?
Not in this class. I teach it in my new invention class. I teach
Okay.
invention energy.
Right,
Yeah.
so, any, the amount of carbon that it takes, like in the whole operations of a building, anywhere between 50 to 90% of it is actually in the construction of the building itself. So if you can reuse and find ways to rehabilitate a site in a way that is environmentally appropriate
Right.
based on issues with soil, it's actually, it's incredibly, it's a lot better from a carbon perspective.
Assuming it's not a contaminated building.
Assuming it's not, but all that's mitigation, there's asbestos, everything's contaminated. After Pepper Construction, I actually worked at Northwestern for a couple of years. I led an experiential learning program here for a couple of years, which was a super fun and exciting time to be at the university at the time. And actually, interestingly, so the university was in the middle of like some very large construction projects, and they turned out to be more expensive than the university thought, and it took more resources to operate them. And so they actually decided to pull back on some programs, and mine was one of them. So I actually decided to, I had to let a few people go at Northwestern, and ended up starting my own consulting firm, which was super fun. I think I have a couple slides about that here. And one example of a project that I did was a company called Rent the Runway. Have you heard of Rent the Runway? The dress company, yeah. So you can rent clothing. And a project that I did two things for them. One is a strategy project. So I helped them build their sustainability strategy by doing a materiality assessment, which basically means, what do customers care about? First, you know how you like go to a website, go to the sustainability page, and it tells you their topic areas? That's what is a materiality assessment. They figured out that, like, if you're Coca-Cola, water is really important, right? And if you're Amazon, you want to think about your supply chain. So I built the sustainability strategy for for Rent the Runway, which was sort of a programmatic work. And I also did a life cycle analysis project for them, which helped figure out what is the impact, the environmental impact of renting clothes versus owning clothes. And it is just an incredibly detailed technical analysis that looks at every single type of clothing that they rent, that other people make, down to the different types of materials that they use, and the impact of like not buying something in the first place. So just a couple of examples.
If I can just jump in.
Yes, please.
Is everyone familiar with life cycle analysis? No? Okay, guess what? As an engineer of any flavor, I think you should. Professor Jennifer Dunn teaches this in her, and she does research in this. She's out of the chemical engineering department. You should get this as a skill in your tool belt, right? The reason for that is you're going to be making decisions, right? Electric vehicle versus gas vehicle. Which is better for the environment? Any idea? The instinct is EVs, right?
That's how we drive.
You sure you haven't taken life cycle analysis? Because that's actually the right answer, but it's a question of what's the break-even point. And it turns out through LCA, you can figure out that it's about 7 years. So if it's less than 7 years, gas cars are less impactful on the environment. If it's more than 7 years, EVs are more are less impactful on the environment. It's talking about carbon, water, energy, the whole 9 yards. But that's starting from literally like, you know, molecules, just about, right? And you're starting from the mine all the way to end of life.
So I was gonna put a quick graphic, but you guys get, you all get the gist. Okay, so I loved working at my own company. It was actually really fun. I didn't like it way more than I thought I was going to. And it was just an interesting, I missed being around people, but I really loved it and thought, you know what, this is it. I'm gonna have my own consultancy forever. But that's not how my path took me. And my husband, who also teaches, here does commercialization and sales for medical device products. And in the pandemic, he was leading a sales team for a new startup that had about maybe 40 sales team people. As a result of the pandemic, they actually had to stop commercializing his product completely because they weren't able to, it was an elective surgery product. And so we both said, oh, shoot, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We had 2 young kids. One of us has to get health insurance. And so that was sort of an example that I think is sometimes helpful to share, that like, you don't always know where your path is going to take you. And I'm really on my sort of 3rd different version of my career. And so to the student that I was talking to this morning, who was asking me about going into consulting or going into sort of a technical field, said, you know, whichever direction you end up going in, there's an opportunity to be flexible on the other side. So know that no path is sort of exactly the way you expect it to be. Thoughts, questions? No? Please.
If you start with consulting, you might be blocking yourself off from engineering opportunities.
That
If you
is
s-
fair.
If you start with engineering, you can often go into consulting, but hardly ever does it work the other way around.
It's true, but we were talking about not necessarily like engineering specifically, but more wanted to go into the solar field. And so we were talking about the opportunity to work at a company like Arup, where you work with multiple as a consultant, a technical consultant,
Right.
versus like Deloitte. So I should have been clear
Got
about
it,
that.
okay.
Working at like deep in one space. And we talk about, if you talked about I shape versus T shape here at all,
I do that in my MEM program. Yeah.
there's sort of the idea of like expertise, T shape versus I shape. You think about the actual, you know, the shape of the type of expertise. I'm T-shaped, which means I have like an inch of knowledge around a ton of topics. And somebody who's I-shaped, it has a sort of a lot of depth of knowledge in sort of short, in a smaller area.
The letter T, the letter I.
Letter T,
Yeah.
letter I.
Yeah, there you go.
It's really hard to do this around someone who teaches this too. No pressure. Okay, so I'm gonna spend now, but stop me at any moment if you have other things you want me.
Oh, no, you're on
Okay.
a roll, you're doing great.
I'm gonna talk about sustainability Google and what I do. Does everybody know what ESG means? Does anybody not know what ESG means? Energy or environmental, social and governance. It's like a framework that helps you figure out the sustainability, but all in those areas. So there's a whole section that I do not have on this. They don't have the slides here, but it's a lot of it is actually a risk mitigation, but it's basically why organizations are focusing now on like their environmental footprint, their sustainability, and their social impact. So environmental is water, waste, carbon/energy and biodiversity impact. The S is the things like diversity and inclusion, and also just employee benefits more broadly. And it's a framework that actually investors use to help figure out how a company is actually looking at their risks. So if you're a company that is 100% focused on using water, I'll use Coca-Cola as an example, and you're not thinking about where you're getting that water, and if Coca-Cola is being sort of thoughtful about it, that is a gigantic risk for somebody who is actually putting money into that organization. And so ESG is a really important framework, and I actually had a guest speaker today who's on our ESG controllership team, who's now like an accountant, who basically like checks my math all the time, right? Like, are we talking about things in the right way? Just a quick why ESG is sort of managing risk, increasing long-term value. There's a lot of mandatory reporting disclosures now. So this is a tax and legal conversation for the SEC and for other things in the European Union as well. But there's lots of increased regulatory focus. So you really have to sort of think about your portfolio, which means like your buildings and your environmental impact. So I can talk through this a bit more, but also customer loyalty and brand reputation, employee attraction and retention, innovation opportunity, and then actual social environmental impact. This is just a quick snapshot of a ton of different articles that are talking through sort of how sustainability has changed. So the class that I teach was taught about 10 years ago, the first one, and it was actually a change management class. It was like, you should do all these great sustainability things, and here's how you should do it. And now my class is a little bit about change management. It's actually a lot also about understanding where the regulatory environment is making you focus. And so sustainability has just really changed so much. And this is actually just a quick snapshot of just some of the policies and regulations that where Google actually has our offices and where we're seeing regulations that are hitting only the built environment. So it's just pretty bonkers right now.
I'm shocked to see that India has got such big bubbles. Like,
They
is
do.
this a relatively new thing for them, or is this something they've been doing for a long time?
Well, so it depends on the type. That's also our data centers.
Okay.
And I'm not on the data center team, but I work with the data center team. But there are actually a lot of also health regulations in India right now that they're trying to put forth. And so, you know, some of these are a little more on the sort of
That's
early scale in the adoption curve,
Yeah.
like New York. But they are actually, there are regulations, at least reporting regulations that
Okay.
we're starting to think about.
Okay.
So what we do, so Google, we strive to build sustainability into everything that we do. This is a sort of suite of the type of areas that Google focuses on: data centers, carbon-free energy, sustainable workplaces, devices and services, so the things that we make, and then technology. So I'm not going to talk through all of them, we'll only sort of touch on sustainable places and carbon-free energy, but in the technology space, this is where if you like go on your phone and you go, if you have Google Maps and you go to Google Maps, there's like a little green leaf that shows you like the most sustainable way to get somewhere. That's actually the kind of thing that we talk about. We have an incredible amount of products that are really focused on just like giving you more information. And the last, I think our environmental reports here said there's like 100,000 single-use cars pulled off the streets because people actually use our maps. So we're hoping that that helps to change the world, even when it's not in our own footprint. So has anybody seen that before? Show of hands, who's seen the little green thing? Anybody ever made a choice to do something because of the green thing? Maybe not. I'm gonna assume you're all walking. You're making the green choice anyways.
They got a wild card. Give me a break, get some on the bus, right?
Okay, so I work in a little area called RUS, so Real Estate and Workplace Services. And this is like all the stuff that supports the Googlers. We try to incorporate sustainability in everything we do in the same way Google does. And we're laying the ground for carbon-free, water stewardship, landfill reduction, and then biodiversity. So all of the areas of sort of programs, which I'll talk a little bit about. And I just wanted to spend a second on sort of organizational structure, because we spent a lot of time talking about that in our class, like where does sustainability live in an organization? And the answer is everywhere and nowhere. So we actually do have a sustainability office in sort of like up here right underneath the CFO. And that team sort of aggregates information from all of the other teams. And so we sit sort of in Google under the CFO's organization in a place called RUS and GSRS, which is Real Estate and Workplace Services, and Google Security and Risk Services. I think it's and Risk Services. I should probably know that better. And so we are in a team called Workplace Experience. There's a team called Real Estate and then Innovation and Governance. And so we don't actually, my team doesn't really control anything. We just make a lot of recommendations and strategies, and then we have to influence all of the other teams, like the design team and the construction team and the operations team, to like do the things we want them to do. So there's a lot of asking for favors, but a lot of also, please do that, otherwise someone else will get mad. So RUS itself, we have about 190,000 Googlers. We have approximately 800 buildings, 60 countries, 200 cities, 360 cafes, 50 buses. So we have a pretty big footprint. It is very much dwarfed by our data centers, but we're trying to work on that. You can stop me, questions, thoughts? Anybody?
Like your cafes and your buses, are most of those outsourced, or are they things like assets that you own and operate?
So half and half. So we own, I don't think we don't have like we'll call it 50-50, but it's not 50-50, about what percentage of our buildings we own versus what we operate or lease. So a leased building means someone else owns it and we, just like if you lease an apartment or rent an apartment, same thing, someone else owns it. Most organizations have either all leased or a small portfolio of owned if they're not a real estate company. We're not a real estate company, we're a tech company, like happens to own some real estate. For a while, we did a lot more construction, but we've sort of pulled some of that back. And so in the places that we own the equipment and the food. And even in the ones we lease, we own a lot of the equipment. And the same thing for buses, we actually do own the majority of those buses. But we have like G cabs that we lease. So it's sort of a difference of, depends on what the place we're talking about.
Okay.
There's a lot of food because we feed every Googler breakfast and lunch every day. And we have these like micro kitchens that have snacks. So there's actually a huge environmental footprint on our food. I spent a lot of time on food.
How about energy? Do you, I mean, you don't generate your own energy, right? Or do you?
No, but we did just enter in agreements for, the word is not they're like micronuclear, but it's not the word. There's a term.
It's a
for
small
what it is.
modular reactor,
Small
SMR,
Modular reactor.
Yeah.
There we go.
SMR.
So, I believe that's in the newest, engagement for Google, where we are actually trying to do on-site generation,
Okay,
at our data centers. But we do have like solar, we have geothermal, so there are ways in which we sort of technically generate energy at our sites.
Okay.
But not through any other sort of more, actually, that's not entirely true. I lied. My boss, just finished a project that's a, district energy plant,
mhm,
100% electric and geothermal in Sunnyvale with like 10 different projects around it, sort of the idea of like a little bit of a mini microgrid.
wow, that's
It's
fantastic,
a really cool project.
that's great.
That would be another bunch of slides. I don't have those here.
We should do that here on campus, right here, this campus,
We talked about it.
you and I, a long time ago. Where did it go? No.
I don't know where that is. I also spent some time in my class. There's a really amazing, Leith Sharp is a professor at Harvard that talks about sustainability project management, and it's my favorite video. It's like a 5-minute video from one of her TED Talks or presentations that talks about how many years it took her to change a light bulb at Harvard. Because it was like an energy project to try to switch over regular light bulbs to LEDs. And the amount of people that she had to get involved to get it changed is hilarious. There was like environmental health and safety was involved because they couldn't dispose of it correctly. So that's a great project management. I'll try to
So
find that video.
ironically, Mike, I had a team of IEMS students about 10 years ago work on that very project here for one of the theaters on campus. They were gonna basically swap out all the light bulbs for LED. The payback was less than 2 years. They
Yep.
did a full analysis, how many down to the lumens, how many lumens they needed by square foot. They had, I mean, very professional, very well put together. I thought for sure, the university was just gonna sign off on this, because I came from corporate America, right? That's how you do things. You do a full analysis, then you present it, they applaud, they sign, and you get the funding and no, that's not how it works here, right? At the end, there was deadpan silence coming from the administration, and the answer was, and I asked them, are you gonna fund this thing? What's gonna happen? They said, no, we need to get a funder for it.
Yeah.
So in other words, a donor for light bulbs. And I said, you got 2-year payback. Why do you need a donor? And they said, we're a university. We rely on donors, right? So.
It's crazy.
2-year payback.
I really love these, but this is why it took 2 years to change a light bulb at Harvard. That's a good.
Well, Lisa's got a lot more stamina. I just said, okay, it's been an hour, I'm done. So I don't pursue things that have is like a dead end. I don't go
Yeah.
into dead ends,
Yes.
right? So.
Well, then I don't know how much you love corporate America.
It was a lot easier
Yeah.
to get certain things done there. I mean, I wrote 15 SARs, in essence, requests for capital. All 15 were approved, all 15 were implemented. Every chance I've had here.
What's interesting is I think there's a lot of podcasts and articles. Brene Brown that talks about vulnerability. She has this, a newer topic and book around like the rate of change. It's insane for me. It's very hard to get decisions made at places like or almost anywhere now because the rate of change of information happens so quickly that you make a decision based on an analysis that you do. It takes 3 months to do an analysis. And by the time you've actually got the team that's making the decision, the problem that you're trying to solve changes so quickly now. And I'll use an example of, so the majority of my work is in carbon. So I look at our environmental footprint of carbon at Ruse. And we had a bunch of funding for projects that fell into our here's our 2019 baseline, here's our 2030 goal, here are all the things I can do to save carbon. But our energy use in data centers is growing so rapidly that we're losing funding for projects that made sense 6 months ago because we have to transfer it elsewhere. So we just have to be so agile. And it's just crazy because I feel like I'm back at a university. I'm like, wait a minute, someone just said yes. What happened? Why do we not do it anymore? So you just have to be really flexible and try not to take it too personally, which is hard. Or idealistic, also hard. Wait, this is going fast. I only have 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, take
Okay.
your time, yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay, so our priorities, net zero carbon, circular economy, water stewardship, and nature and biodiversity. I spend most of my time here. Personally, I think in the world, water and biodiversity are way bigger problems to be solved than carbon at the moment, or in the ecosystem. I just did a bunch of the class. I joked about how much I was terrifying everyone. I was like, so is everybody gonna be really depressed when I leave today? I pulled up a bunch of new stats, like how bad carbon is going right now, and where the Paris Agreement is and where we are now. But really the rate in which we are sort of going through mass extinction from a biodiversity perspective. So biodiversity is the nature and animals and plants is pretty rapid. So we need to be thinking about the intersection of all of them, right? The carbon aspect, but also making sure that we're thinking about biodiversity means biology or biological things in nature and the diversity of them. So you have only one type of seed. There's an insect that can come through, destroy all of our seeds. We don't have food. Thinking about the diversity of things in our world. And water, we need that to breathe. So lots of sustainability value for Ruse, enhancing asset value, reducing operating costs, meeting investor demands, and protecting our legacy and reputation. I like to talk about this because I think it's important to talk about the why we do things in the sustainability space. And this is just a quick visual that says Ruse designs and operates our places and spaces, but it's showing sort of a combination of the things that we do. Build and restore on-site and off-site habitats, looking at treating and maximizing non-potable water use, construction, operational waste, electrification of our portfolio, which means we're trying to stop the amount of natural gas that we rely on in order to electrify. But then when we electrify, we have to couple it with alternative energy to ensure that we are actually becoming carbon neutral. And then overall reducing our energy demands. And just a quick program project note. These are all programs that we're doing. So there's a water stewardship program, net zero program. These are all projects that support those programs. So now I lead the teams that do the programs, but we work with a lot of project teams to deliver against it. So there's lots of stuff that we're doing, decarbonizing, transforming our energy use and influencing our partners, benefiting and sort of restoring watershed areas on and off site, and then spending quite a bit of time on food waste and single-use plastics. Not everything we do, but a part of it. So just a couple quick notes about our work. Ruse, we really try to be relentlessly intentional. This is really about just being very local. So trying not to solve a water problem in a place where water is not a problem, but trying to really focus on water in a place where water is a problem. And same thing for ensuring that we're focusing on solar. This is an example of a photo that I have a little bit later. That's our site called Bayview in California, where we actually invented a new type of solar system for roofs that actually capture solar from sort of mooring to night. We did not do that in a place in Canada, we did that in California. So thinking about what is important from a trade-off perspective for sustainability. And so quickly, carbon and energy, we have moved from carbon neutral, which meant we were buying renewable energy credits, to like opt to do sustainability stuff somewhere else that someone else is doing for us, to buying 100% renewable energy across the globe, to something really amazing, which I'm not gonna spend too much time on, but I do spend a lot of time in my life on it, which is called 24/7 carbon-free energy. So we are literally trying to map out the hourly energy usage of every data center and office by the hour in the grid that we operate. So where the energy is happening in order to be able to actually match it with alternative energy. So we're doing it in a location-based concept. I can talk about that for a long time, but I won't. So really quickly, energy efficiency, trying to do energy stuff. Lots of discussion about circular economy, bless you. It's better to like not use something at all from the beginning than try to just figure out how to dispose of it better. So we're really trying to go upscale, upstream, and stop the creation of stuff at the beginning, and then really strong focus on food and food waste and biodiversity. We have like this crazy, amazing woman I work with who is on my team. She's a PhD in ecology, like trying to protect her no matter what. And we do things like monarch habitat, and really try to focus on the communities that we are actually focused in. Let me just show a couple of quick examples of some really cool projects we have. This is actually one in King's Cross in London. It's another reuse project as well. So we took an existing building, they're rehabilitating it actually for our office space. This is it will be one of the largest open biological park areas in London, but it'll be the only one on the roof. So tons of work from our biodiversity perspective of different types of native and adaptive. Native and adaptive means like plants that are like supposed to be in London and not ones that are just pretty but aren't there and can be invasive. And then this is just a quick picture of Bayview. So this is what this is actually on this entirely this is a geothermal site that actually also has these wetlands and ponds that were created specifically for water use, capture and reuse throughout the building, but also to make sure we're mitigating some potential flooding issues. So although California doesn't get a lot of water, they do actually have those like landslides that happen because when water does happen, the land can no longer absorb it. And so we tried to design it to be able to actually be an estuary for some of that additional water. But an incredible system of geothermal and solar at all hours of the day. And this cool roof that does water capture. Water actually sort of slides off to the end, as well as being a fully solar roof system. And so this was an example of something that a lot of times we try to just this like adaptive reuse. I have an example of that. No, later, but I'm not going to go through that. And this is one where we just tried to design things differently, trying to think about how the world can be thinking about things in a new way. Please.
So far you talked a lot about you're trying to like mitigate impacts in the local community. We have talked a lot about like the finance and stuff behind it. So when you're trying to do all of this, like what is the cost to Google? Like how do you weigh whether it's worth it for you to mitigate these impacts when you weigh in the cost of how much more expensive it is to build a building like this and build estuaries and all that stuff compared to just putting on a concrete structure and just building. Like I'm
so glad you asked me that question. It depends on if you're talking about Google 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or today. When this was designed, so this took 10 years. This was sort of like early stage Google interests. They didn't really care about how much it cost. They were just really interested in changing the world because they knew they could. And honestly, there was just excess funding around. And there was a lot more, the scale was smaller, and so there was actually, I've only been at Google now for a little over 3 years. I wasn't there when decisions like this were being made. I've only worked there when they feel like a normal company that only makes decisions based on how much things cost. But it's a really great question. We do have goals to try to focus on the other benefits. I think I showed up that other slide that shows like employee retention, those types of things. We do actually have goals about how to change the world. And so sometimes we can get funding through essentially other buckets of money about trying to change industry, which we did. This is actually a product that a company called Certainteed actually sells now, like a version of these solar panels that you can actually buy. But it's a really great question. So we do a lot of financial analysis on things like regular construction, like concrete and steel, versus there's another project that we're doing that's a mass timber, which is like a newer, more sustainable type of construction. And we spend a lot of time on how much does it cost, and actually what does this look like over the lifetime of the project. So
And that's
it's
the
still
big
really
difference, right? I
important.
mean, if you hire a contractor to build you a building, they're gonna look at the construction costs, but not necessarily the operating costs.
Absolutely.
And when you
Yep.
have buildings on this campus, in almost every case, they're gonna look at the construction costs and not the operating costs. But when you own that building and you're a for-profit company that's publicly traded, you have a fiduciary responsibility to look at both. And apparently that's what Google's doing now, but
Yep.
what, if I were to put up an apartment building to sell it to somebody else, I would look at the construction costs only and let the operating costs be somebody else's problem, right?
Yep.
And that's certainly true in residential. In residential, it's outrageous, right? They put whatever the cheapest, furnace, hot water heater, roof, water, all of it. I mean, all those systems are really just at the lowest possible cost because they're trying to turn over the units, get them sold, and usually the lowest cost leads to the lowest price, which leads to faster turnover.
Absolutely.
And they don't really care about operating costs because that's like the owner's gonna worry about that.
100%. And also something like, which I won't talk about, but mass timber is like a new type of construction that essentially you don't have to use any paint. It's like a beautiful interior wood building. And so when you actually look at all of the finishes so carpet, paint, drywall that you would normally put on top of the building, actually, most of the time it actually comes out as being a net negative. So it's very interesting.
Is there like a dollar amount you assign to avoiding kilogram of carbon emission?
Yep. $1 of CO2 per ton avoided. Yep. I'm not allowed to tell you what the number is, but we do have a number, and I spend probably 20% of my time estimating that number and trying to figure out which projects we do and which ones fall underneath it. And that number is largely driven for almost every company by the cost of carbon removals. So how much money can we reduce our own emissions versus how much can we actually sort of buy in a carbon removal? But something called Science-Based Targets Initiative, we have that, most other organizations do too. We have promised to reduce our emissions by half and then try to reduce the other in removals. So we have to do sort of a combination, but that is still like a guiding post for us. If we can do a project that fits it, it's sort of like an ROI, but we have a 2030 target.
Any other questions for Jessica? I want one last question.
Yes.
The Thompson Center,
Yeah.
is that reuse? I mean, I know
Oh,
that
yeah.
Google owns it. Google's doing a significant amount of work there, right? And they're gonna occupy the building, operate in the building.
Yeah.
This is a massive project, right?
Oh, yeah, I was there 2 days ago. I have some really cool pictures. So
Really?
the Thompson Center was a government building in Chicago that I'm sure someone at Google wishes we didn't buy, but we did. So too late, and we've done a life cycle analysis to figure out whether we should reskin it. So glazing, new glass, not new glass. We're putting in new glass, but we're trying to keep almost everything else, but it'll be an all-electric building.
It was an amazing building in its day, right? I mean, in its day, it was revolutionary. Has anyone bid, otherwise known as the State of Illinois Center, Thompson Building? Nobody? You guys aren't from Chicago. Okay. It's an amazing location. It's an amazing building. And I think having Google take it over was, I think, going to be transformational. So there you go.
This is it This is our proposed vision for it, and this is an example of what it looks like today, under construction.
All
Thanks.
right, thank you, nice job, beautiful. You guys are hearing from a real life project manager, program manager in the field that's working on projects that hopefully will impact your future and mine. So thank you, Jessica, that was great.
Yes.
And I'll see you guys on Monday. We'll start talking about outsourcing, which I believe is chapter 12, okay?
I thought it was supposed to be an hour, so my bad.
That's okay. Everything's 50 minutes when you're on the.
Or I meant like, I thought like not, I was supposed to be like I'm so used to my 3-hour class that I like,
It's very hard to scale things down, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
well,
just-
now that I'm used to that, yeah.
So we should team up more because it seems like your background and mine complement each other almost, I mean, like, it's bizarre because the stuff you're talking about, I mean, it's just like, I lived through that, I something like that, and it's just like, but you've been the built environment from the beginning,
Full time.
and I've been everything but the built environment.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've been doing new product development.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I think I did one construction project where I started with a blank sheet of paper and I
Yeah.
literally drew out what the construction would look like. It was for a laboratory. It
Yeah.
was about, what, 6,000 square feet or something. And yes, they built it exactly the way I laid it out. And that was my first and last built environment project, right? So